With great power comes great responsibility.
Compromise where you can. Where you can't, don't. Even if everyone is telling you that something wrong is something right. Even if the whole world is telling you to move. It is your duty to plant yourself like a tree, look them in the eye and say, no, you move.
Never step onto the battlefield of ideas unprepared. Before you enter the fray, you need a plan. And there's no better place to get one than right here on Tactics with host Caleb Colquitt. The Situation Room goes live now on News Radio 1440.
Welcome in, everybody. Thank you so much for being with us on this Thursday, and I do apologize for not having a show yesterday. That was something that I did not know about. There was a breakdown in communication here at the Cumulus Studios, and unfortunately there was somebody was actually using the News Radio 1440 studio when I came in, and of course, since it was filming a commercial and we wanted to make sure that we gave our clients the best possible treatment, my show kind of took a backseat, so I apologize for that. Didn't know that that was going to take place, or I would have given y'all some advance warning. But nonetheless, we're in studio today. That's what's important. Although it seems as though we have been just plagued by bad luck, because I know that it's Thursday and everybody, of course, like me, is looking forward to Becky Garrettson's weekly commentary on what is going on in the state of Alabama. But unfortunately, I have not heard from her, so I don't know what is going on. So Becky, if you're out there, if you're paying attention, please feel free to call in as normal. I'll try to keep an eye on the phones for you, and if you better late than never. So we'll see if that actually comes to pass. Before we do get into the news of the day, I do want to make a quick announcement for something going on at the local level. You may remember, I guess about 2, maybe 3 weeks ago, you may recall that I actually spoke with one of the members of the committee that oversees the prayer breakfast here in Montgomery, and I also talked to Miss Joe about the Bible reading that is going to take place on the Capitol steps. Well, it turns out I'm actually going to be one of the people that gets to go up and read the Bible for 15 minutes. This thing is a 72-hour marathon. They read the entire Bible on the Capitol steps here in Montgomery from beginning to end. They start with Genesis 1:1. They end with Revelation 22. What is that, 27? I think there's 27 verses in that chapter. Double check me on that one. I know that it starts with Genesis 1:1 at least. But anyway, so I'm not sure what section of the Bible I'll be reading. They won't know until they just get to it. And like I said, they read it from beginning to end, so wherever they leave off, I'm going to pick up. So if you do want to hang out, you want to hear me read the Bible in my radio voice, feel free to come by the Capitol steps tomorrow at 3 o'clock, and I'll be reading until 3:15. So should be a good time. Anybody that wants to come, and it's a great event to go to. I was saying earlier when we did the interview that I remember, I think it was last year. I'm pretty sure it was last year. I actually just happened to have some free time after my show back when I was on at 9 a.m., you remember. And so I just went down there to the Capitol steps and had a sack lunch and just ate lunch there on the Capitol, where the grassy area is, and just listen to people read the Bible. So it's a great thing to, if you have a chance to, especially if you're working downtown, come by and see it. And it is, we're really looking forward to it. It looks like it's going to be a really great event. Oh, it looks like Brent Missildine is congratulating me on that. Well, thank you so much, Brent. I appreciate that. It's always good to know you're listening. You may remember he's actually been on the program before, one of the ministers down at the Prattville Church of Christ. So appreciate that. Thanks for the vote of confidence. But yeah, that'll be going on tomorrow, so feel free to check that out. Now, we do have to get into the news of the day. And I've got to say, I've been covering news for a while now. I don't ever remember there being this much stupid in one news cycle. And I'm not just talking about state or national. I'm talking about all of it. There was so much stupid in the past 48 hours. It is a veritable storm of stupid on all fronts. And it's not even necessarily all coming from one side, although in this case, it is primarily coming from one side. There is stupid raining down from the heavens like a flood. And probably the most prominent example of this, and I'm going to go ahead and give you some backstory because the backstory is actually really great. One of the best things that's happened to the state in a while. It's the reaction to it that there was an awful lot of stupid going on in this. Really, this almost this entire episode could be your daily dose of stupid. I know I usually save that to the very end, right before the chaplain's report, but today there's just you're going to see a ton of stupid going on in our political process. And the news that sort of sparked this, at least at the local level, is that Alabama has finally passed an abortion ban. You remember we've been talking about this for about 2 weeks. There is now a ban on abortion that has passed the House. And the only exceptions for this particular abortion ban are specifically life or extreme health risk to the mother. So it's almost a complete abortion ban. It makes it a class, I believe it's a class B felony. So it is something that is really strictly enforced if this thing winds up passing. The big hurdle now is going to be the Senate. Because despite some of my disagreements with Governor Ivey has a pretty solid record for being very pro-life. And so I think that Governor Ivey probably winds up signing this thing virtually the minute it hits her desk. The question is, will the Senate pass it? And I think that it will. I really do. I think that the Senate winds up passing it, especially when you're looking at their voting record with the amendment that came up last time where it was basically an amendment to give some extra legal protection for the state when it comes to things like abortion. And so because of that, and because they've had a pretty solid record of being pro-life as well, it appears as though it's going to pass. But certainly this is something that will require some prayer. And I do heartily encourage everybody to do that and to pray for our leaders so that this ban will finally go through. And the House did pass the abortion ban 74-3. Now, you may be asking why 74-3? There's definitely more people in the House of Representatives than 77 people. There's a lot more. So why are there so few votes? Why did so many people seem to abstain? Well, there's actually 76 Republicans in the House, and yet there were 2 that presumably voted against it, and I think it was 1 Democrat that voted against it as well. The reason is because most of the Democrat representatives in the House walked out. They were so furious and they wanted to show their tail and make a spectacle of themselves that they refused to even vote on this bill. Just absolutely walked out. And I've got to say, out of all the things that you can make a protest and make a big stink about, this to me seems like both politically and morally the strangest one to do so. Because I understand that there are some issues that get really heated and there's a lot of legitimate points on both sides and there's a healthy dialogue and debate that takes place. And because it gets heated and because it's something that can be very contentious, you kind of want to make grandstands with that. And honestly, I've never been a big fan of those, but at least I understand where someone's coming from when they do something like that. Abortion is not one of those. I don't understand this fervor that a lot of Democrats and people on the left in general have for really wanting to keep the ability to kill your children. I really don't understand why this becomes such a big issue to them personally. I mean, even if they want to be against it, I don't understand why the ferocity. I don't understand why they have made this their big issue that they want to make a stand and plant their flag and say, we will not budge on this. It is a human being, and that's why I don't really understand why this becomes the big central issue they want to make a stand on. But this is what happened, and I think part of it may have also been that they were really upset that their amendment to allow for exemptions in the cases of rape and incest, which from neither a logical nor a moral standpoint makes any sense. I've never heard any even somewhat compelling arguments on either of those sides. That amendment already failed 72-26. And Representative Terry Collins gave some commentary on exactly why these exceptions were not going to be allowed, which, if I were giving the interview, my response would have been, well, because it's wrong. And that would have been the end of it. I mean, if you want me to explain why it's wrong, I would have given that explanation as well. But Terry Collins does more of a pragmatist argument, and here's what she says. And you remember she was on this show actually talking about this a while back. She says, quote, "My goal with this bill is to let the Supreme Court possibly revisit that decision on just the issue that they made the decision, which was that the baby in the womb is a person." So there's a couple of reasons why this makes sense. And Terry Collins understands this. First of all, the personhood of the child in the womb is the standard that you need to overturn Roe v. Wade. In fact, the prevailing majority opinion that established abortion as something that the states could not ban altogether and outright, that decision in Roe v. Wade specifically stated that if you could ever prove the personhood of the child growing in the womb, then abortion would be made illegal. That's not me saying that. That's not other conservatives saying that. That is the majority opinion that upheld abortion in the Supreme Court. And so they essentially, whether they intended to or not, kind of laid out a blueprint for how to overturn Roe v. Wade. And Terry Collins understands that. And because of that, and because of the people that helped her craft this bill, that wasn't Personhood Alabama. I think that was the Alabama Life Coalition. Because they understand that that's the standard that they'll have to overcome, they have to craft this bill in such a way that recognizes the personhood of the child. And allowing for exceptions for rape and incest would undermine that. It would completely undermine that. Because if it's a person, then the circumstances surrounding the conception makes no difference. If it's a health risk or a life or death situation with the mother, you can, at the very least, make a distinction there. You can, at the very least, say, okay, well, the goal is still to preserve a human life. And so you see the distinction there? Because of that, Terry Collins understands that adding this amendment that allows for exceptions in the case of rape or incest would undermine the chief tenet of the purpose of this bill, which is specifically to challenge Roe v. Wade. And so if this amendment had gone through, the whole purpose of passing this bill would have essentially been made moot. I mean, it would have been a nice political grandstand, and I'm not even necessarily using that in a negative context. I'm just saying that's essentially all it would have been. It would have been symbolic, but it wouldn't have done anything because Roe v. Wade has not been overturned, and this bill would have no potential to overturn it. Ergo, passing the bill would essentially not do anything. And that's exactly what the Democrats wanted. That's why they wanted this amendment to pass, because if it did, they know that it undercuts the primary purpose of the bill, which is to act as a counter to Roe v. Wade and to force the current Supreme Court to make a decision on that. Because you'll remember in the original Supreme Court decision, they never dealt with the personhood of the child in the womb, and they did so specifically. And so this, if it goes to the Supreme Court and they decide to take the case, would essentially force them to consider whether or not the child growing inside the pregnant woman is actually a distinct living human being or not. Okay, it looks like we've got a caller. I'm hoping that's Becky, but we'll find out here in a second. Good afternoon. What's your name?
You're going to be sadly disappointed.
You're not Becky.
No, I'm not Becky. That's a big drop-off from what you were expecting, too.
No, it's not. Nonetheless, I was trying to get Becky Garrettson on, but it looks like she has forgotten about us or something. So go ahead. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I just had a question about something. One of your coworkers this morning was talking about that someone made an idiot out of themselves yesterday in Alabama with regard to abortion, and I didn't know which side it was, who it was, or anything. But it seems to be making the circuit with regard to the news around the country. So do you know what he's talking about?
You're talking about Alabama State Representative John Rogers?
Maybe. I don't know. See, I just caught the very tail end of it, and I know that's kind of vague.
Well, I tell you what, since you brought it up, and that was going to be my next point anyway, if you'll just hang on for a second, let me go ahead and play the clip that they're talking about that made the rounds in the national news, because I actually have it pulled up here.
Okay.
All right, here it goes. This is Alabama State Representative John Rogers of Birmingham.
All I'm saying to you, it ought to be a woman's choice. I'm not about to be as a male tell a woman what to do with her body. She has the right to make that decision herself. To rape or incest. Some kids are unwanted. So you kill them now, kill them later. You bring them in the world unwanted, unloved. Then you send them to the electric chair. So you kill them now, kill them later. But the bottom line is that I think we should be making this decision.
All right, so there you have it. Representative John Rogers of Birmingham. Some kids are just unwanted, so you either kill them now or kill them later. You either kill them in the womb or you kill them in the electric chair. That's his stance. So was that the clip that you were thinking about?
It had to be, because if you say anything that ridiculous, maybe, is it possible to impeach somebody for being stupid?
No, there would be an awful lot of people impeached if we made that a rule.
That's pretty high level of stupid right there, though.
Oh, as I said at the beginning of the show, the stupid has been raining down as a flood from heaven the past 2 days. There has been so much stupid in the news. But yeah, there's several reasons why this is an incredibly idiotic argument. First of all, he's essentially making the case that we kill criminals before they commit crimes. Let's just assume that he were right and all the children that are aborted would commit some kind of heinous crime that would land them in the electric chair, which is absurd on a number of levels, and we'll get to that in a second. But even if that were the case, he's saying that we should go ahead and kill them before they commit crimes. Now, I don't feel comfortable with the idea of trying to figure out which people are likely to commit crimes and which ones are not likely, and going ahead and destroying them before they have the opportunity to commit the crime. That's literally the plot of Captain America: Winter Soldier.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just horrendous what he's suggesting there.
I'd hate to know what his ideas about our youth is. You know, if he has that kind of an attitude about it, that's over the top, and that's embarrassing.
Well, and that's another thing, too. You can never make the value of a person's life dependent upon whether they're, quote, wanted or unwanted, as he's suggesting. Because if that were the case, there's a lot of people that would be executed. Heck, there's a lot of people that don't want me. that would, I mean, because, you know, they disagree with me politically, that would not want me. And so are we really going to bring up this new standard that anybody that is, quote, unwanted or unloved should just go ahead and be executed? That's absolutely insane.
Obviously, I've known a lot of young people that had children that were surprises, and they went ahead and had them, and some of them had a lot of strikes against them right off the bat, and sometimes they turned out far better than their parents ever thought about being. You don't know how a kid's going to turn out.
No.
And that can be negative, but in many instances, though, it is positive. And this idea of thinking you can put a value on life, that child coming may have far more value than the politician does.
I don't disagree. And here's another thing that we really need to consider, and I want to kind of get your reaction to this as well. If we are supposed to just kill anybody that is at a high probability of committing crimes, if that's really what our new standard is going to be, then that means we need to kill every child that only has one parent, whether it's an accident or divorce or whatever. If there's only one parent, we need to go ahead and kill all those children because they are at a far higher probability of committing crimes. We need to kill every child whose parent makes below about $20,000 or $30,000 a year because they're at a very high risk for committing crimes. We need to kill every child that is currently receiving welfare or some kind of government assistance because those childs are at a disproportionately high rate of committing crimes. And I know this is going to be wildly offensive. That's the point. We need to kill all minority children because they're at a higher rate of committing crimes. Now, if you find that horribly racist and offensive, that's because it is.
I'm thinking of a person that fits a lot of that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's our Surgeon General.
Are you talking about Ben Carson?
Yes.
He's actually over the HUD department.
Oh, I thought that's right.
Yeah, he's not Surgeon General. A lot of people suggested he should be the Surgeon General, and that he would have been good at that. But he's in the Department of Housing and Urban Development.
Is, of course.
Do what now?
And I say, of course, you know who Dr. Carson is. And
Sure.
He's an incredible representative of what's all good and right about America.
Well, and that's the thing. This is a guy who was raised by a single mother. He was in deep poverty with lots of brothers and sisters. And he was, of course, a minority person as well. He's a black guy. So he had statistically everything working against him.
Plus,
But this is a man who has saved the lives of hundreds of children.
Yeah, he has a track record at school, too, because he got in all kinds of trouble, got in fights, and stayed in trouble with the office a lot, from what I understand.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think his contributions to the world have been incredible.
Absolutely. And that's really the bottom line here, is that you don't know, and you can't just decide ahead of time what a person's life is going to be, and because you think that their chances are dismal, that you go ahead and kill them. That's something that tyrants and the worst dictators in human history have done. That's not something that Americans do.
Isn't it? A little bit Hitlerish.
It's very Hitlerish. That was Hitler's plan. He said that Jews were leeches off of society and also included religious people and gay people and communists. And because of that, he had them transported to death camps to have them executed. Yeah. That was his whole argument.
I know. And, I hadn't heard the clip, and, I just wanted to know what was going on, because when we hear something like that, and anything, something comes up about abortion, that my ears perk up anyway, and I hate that I can't hear it. And hopefully, we've already passed the ban, right?
The House has. It goes to the Senate now. Yes.
Well, I do like our percentage.
Yeah, it's got a very good chance of passing, and like I said, I can't see Governor Ivey vetoing it, so it has a pretty clear shot to wind up passing.
Yeah. Well, take care. Enjoy the show.
Yeah, thanks for the call. I appreciate it. But there's so many reasons why that's absurd and ridiculous. The idea that we ought to just be killing people before they even commit the crime is a thoroughly un-American and thoroughly anti-human idea. Like I said, that's the whole plot of Captain America Winter Soldier, is that they put you'll remember S.H.I.E.L.D. was co-opted by Hydra, and they're the bad guys in the movie, and they created an algorithm that predicts when a person is going to commit a crime, and it just circles the entire earth and kills anybody that's about to commit a crime, and they're trying to create a perfect society. That's right out of it's literally right out of science fiction, the idea that you start killing people before they commit crimes. It's like, what's that show, Minority Report, I think, where they basically figure out how to predict when people are going to commit crimes, and then they kill them before that happens. I'm probably butchering that synopsis. I've not actually seen a full episode of one of them, so take that with a grain of salt. But my point is, this is something that's a supervillain out of science fiction does, not somebody that should be holding office in the state of Alabama's House of Representatives. And this really brings me to a very simple way to break essentially any abortion argument. Anytime somebody tries to apply a standard to people in the womb, all you have to do is say, what if it were a 5-year-old? And not every argument, but 9 times out of 10, it pretty much washes away any chances of that argument surviving. Because if you were saying the same thing about children that were already born in the analogy that I just used and explained, then you understand very quickly why that wouldn't fly. If, like I said, if it were just somebody that had the odds stacked against them, and they were somebody that was a minority and impoverished and only had one parent and all these things, and you just decided, well, they've got very little chance of being a productive member of society, so let's just go ahead and kill them now. I mean, any person would look at that and say, that's incredibly evil. But why don't we apply the same logic to the person growing in the womb? Why is that any different? And another thing that you also are completely ignoring here is that you're assuming that adoption is not an option as well. There are some children that when a woman is impregnated, she doesn't want to take care of that child. That happens. But adoption is also an option. They also have the ability to give their child up to a couple that does want it. And this idea that that's not a viable thing, or there are too many children that are aborted to, there would be so many of them it would fill up our orphanages, That's not true either, which even if that were the case, growing up in an orphanage is still better than dying. But even if that weren't the case, there are people that wait in line on the waiting list for years to be able to adopt a baby. And I have known several couples that went through this. People in my own family have gone through this. There's a couple at my congregation right now that has been on the waiting list for a baby for, I think, about a year and a half now. And I mean, great couple, make good money, have a great home, good Christian morals and values, very faithful to one another. Even still have a hard time being able to find a baby to adopt. And so this idea that because they're unwanted, they shouldn't be given a chance, like I said, even if they did wind up in an orphanage, that's still better than being executed. But the odds of that happening are pretty slim. It's harder to get some older kids adopted. But as far as babies, there is no shortage of couples that want to go and adopt babies. That's just simply not true. And so this argument completely ignores even considering that as a possible option. And even if his logic here weren't garbage, as we've just pointed out, his facts are still completely wrong. So, in the past decade, the state of Alabama has executed approximately 2.4 people per year. So if you're looking at from 2018 to 2008, you add that up and average up how many we execute a year, it runs about 2.4. That's pretty close. Is he really suggesting that if we didn't abort children in the state of Alabama, that we would be executing 6,000 people? Because that's about how many people are aborted in the state of Alabama. That's how many children we lose a year just in our state. That's right. Ruby Red, Alabama, part of the Bible Belt, still about 6,000 abortions a year. Is he really suggesting that every single one of those children would grow up and wind up in the electric chair when we currently have a rate of about 2.4? I mean, the abortion rate is 2,500 times larger than our execution rate. Does he really think the people of Alabama are so stupid to believe that we would be executing people en masse, that these people that are aborted would commit crimes that are so heinous that they would merit the death penalty in every single one of these cases? You've got to be kidding me. There's absolutely no way. And another thing to consider too, even if that were true, that's still ruthlessly killing people that you think might become criminals eventually at some point before they're born. And just to kind of give you an idea of why this argument is complete garbage, we'll go ahead and look at this graphic. So this is a chart that shows abortions and the abortion rate in the country. And it starts at 1965. You'll see a big spike right around the time Roe v. Wade. And then it peaks about 1980 and goes down slightly and has been really since about 1981, 82, I think is where that happened. And the line that I really want you to pay attention to here is the abortion rate, because that, of course, adjusts for population. So if you're looking at that red line and you see the abortion rate, that's the best indicator of exactly where our abortion, the amount of abortion per population, and you can see that that's been going down since the 1980s. Now, what I want you to do is contrast that with this next chart. This is the violent crime rate from 1960 to 2016. You see, you would think, based on this particular argument, that if we were to not abort children, that we would have an explosion of crime because these children are unwanted and unloved. You would think that that would mean there would be a reverse correlation. In other words, the more abortions we have, the less violent crime we have. But there's absolutely no relationship between these two at all. If you're looking at violent crimes, they peak right about 1994, 1993, somewhere in that area. And then there's a steady decline. And remember that we had a peak of abortion rate in about the 1980s and then a steady decline. Well, if we're not aborting nearly as many people per capita, according to Representative John Rogers' logic, then the reverse should be true. If our abortion rate is going down, our violent crime rate should be going up because we're not, quote unquote, aborting the criminals. But if you're looking at these two graphs, the data simply does not bear out that argument. In fact, it shows the exact opposite. Now, I don't think that the violent crime rate is going down because we're having less abortions. I'm saying that there's no relationship between the two of them whatsoever. And this idea that aborting children is a good way to lower the crime rate and because if we don't abort them in the womb, then we're going to have to execute them in the electric chair. That is just a mountain of stupid on top of a whole planet of stupid. There's no way to even fathom how wrong that is, both from a moral perspective and from a facts and data perspective. There's just nothing that backs up that statement. For whatever reason, I guess Democrats would like it to be true because it sort of salves their conscience when it comes to supporting a policy that kills children. But the facts and data just don't back you up on that. I'm sorry. There is absolutely no way that you can make that argument even come close to working. And when asked about it, he basically doubled down and said, oh yeah, I meant what I said. They gave him a chance to walk it back. They asked him, because this was an interview that they did later with Yellowhammer News. They came back the next day and asked him about it. He's like, oh yeah, I stand behind what I said. I mean, this is a guy who fell out of the stupid tree and hit every single branch on the way down. There is no other word to describe it. I wish my ability as a communicator were better and I could come up with a better description, but I don't think there's a more appropriate analogy to give here. But it all boils down to this. It all boils down to worldview. Do you blame people for their own actions? Do you think people should be held responsible for their own actions? And I'm not talking about the actions of the mother and using the child as a punishment for being lewd or any of that. I'm not saying that there's no legitimacy to that argument, because I think that you have to hold all people accountable for their actions, but that's not even what I'm talking about here. Do you believe that society determines what a person does, or that the person themselves and the choices that they make determines what that person does? Because the implication here by Representative John Rogers is that, well, they're being born into a less than ideal situation, therefore they're going to become murderers. They're going to become psychopaths that do crimes that are so heinous they're going to wind up in the electric chair. That's what he's saying. That because these children have certain demographics, that we need to go ahead and off them before they even get a chance to live or a chance to make their own choices and their own decisions. That's not America. And more importantly, it's completely unchristian. The whole crux of Christian teaching is that people do make their own choices. We make our own decisions. We can choose right or we can choose wrong and reap the rewards or benefits as the case may be. But we still make our own choices. And it seems as though Representative Rogers, along with a lot of the Democrats, have this unfortunate worldview where they say that society is responsible for all the world's ills. We saw this just recently with the violent crime, not with the violent crime, with the voting for incarcerated persons, with Bernie Sanders trumpeting this, which I don't really even understand what demographic he's trying to reach there, but basically suggesting that these people are just victims of their circumstances. They can't make their own decisions. They're incapable of choosing for themselves. And the only reason they became criminals or did bad things in the first place is because of societal woes. That's not the way that it is. I get that there are certain societal factors that make a person more likely or less likely to commit crimes or do bad things. That is true. I talk about those statistics a lot on this show. But the idea that just because somebody has the deck stacked against them, or because they are more likely to become criminals, that we ought to judge them before they even get a chance to make a decision, is incorrect on a number of moral levels. If you're going to make a decision on who a person is, it's hilarious to me that the left, who claims to be the party of tolerance and acceptance, is the ones that are saying, yeah, but they're probably going to be criminals, so we should just go ahead and kill them before they're even born. I'm sorry, that's not how this works. You don't get to decide whether someone lives or dies based on the demographics. You see, whether we're talking about race or income level or whether or not the person has both parents in the home, all of those things have a likelihood and an effect on a child's life, of course. But let's not pretend that that sets your course in life and then you can do nothing to alter it. A person's choices matter. And we ought to be following the words of Martin Luther King and judging people based on the content of their character. In other words, the decisions that they make, the choices, and the person that they become, rather than assuming just because of a person's bank account or their marital status or the marital status of their parents or the color of their skin that they're not worth saving. I can't believe I even have to say this, but it's something that should be self-evident to everyone. That's what our founders believed, and it's what the Bible teaches. We're going to go to a break. We'll be back in just a minute.
And now for a reading from the Social Justice Warrior Bible with Pastor Gregory Post.
Welcome in. I'm Gregory Post, head pastor at the Eternal Living Word Trans-Denominational Community Church and Coffee House in Novato, California. And now it's time once again for another reading of the SJW Bible. Today's story is going to be about how Naaman was cured of his leprosy in 2 Kings chapter 5, verses 8 through 14. And it says, "It happened when Elisha, the man and or woman of God, depending on how he identified at the time, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, and he sent word to the king, saying, 'Why have you torn your clothes? Now let him come to me, and he shall know that there is a prophet in Israel.' So Naaman came with his horse and his chariots, which were sustainably raised and emitted no greenhouse gases, and stood at the doorway of the house of Elisha. Elisha sent a messenger to him, saying, 'Go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh will be restored to you, and you will be clean.' Not that I'm implying that you were dirty just because you were a leper. That would be leper shaming. But Naaman was furious and went away, saying, 'Behold, I thought, he will surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, and wave his hand all over the place and cure the leper. Are not Abana and Paphra and the rivers of Damascus better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean?' So he turned and went away in rage. Then his servants came near and spoke to him, saying, 'Wow, that Elisha guy is such a xenophobic jerk. Where does he get off implying that the rivers in Israel are better than the rivers in our country? That nationalist jerk probably believes in Israeli exceptionalism too.' So then God spoke to Naaman directly and said, 'Naaman, I am so sorry for being intolerant and not accommodating enough. I should never have asked you to have to go and do something to be cured. You believe in me, and since purification comes from faith only, I'll just go ahead and heal you right here and now.' And from that hour forward, his flesh was cured, and they all went out to try some local craft beer." Wow, so inspirational. Thank you for listening to this reading of the SJW Bible. And remember, the only truth that matters is your truth.
And welcome back. Thanks so much for being with us through the break. And considering we have gotten surplus levels of stupid in the past couple of days, and I've been saying that what someone should do at some point is to go back through this episode and see how many times I use the word stupid. I really do need like a counter up here in the corner of my screen, but nonetheless, not to be outdone by our local officials doing all kinds of stupid things. We also had quite a bit of stupid on the national level. So this whole fiasco with Attorney General William Barr, there's several reasons why there was a lot of stupid going on. And there's even some stupid coming from both sides, and I'll explain that here in a second. But you have to understand, Democrats are very angry at Barr for something he essentially didn't do. William Barr, they are now upset about because the Mueller report came back with results that they did not like. Now, all Bill Barr did was report the news. He didn't make it. And this is the same kind of thing that I, as a person that has been a journalist and also been a news opinion guy, sometimes when I say things that are true, even though they're not popular, you get a little bit of this too. All William Barr did was tell people what Mueller found. That's it. And they're getting mad at him because they don't like what he's saying, even though he's not the one that did the investigation in the first place. They don't like what the results of this report were, ergo, they're mad at William Barr because he happened to be the one delivering the message. So they've essentially misdirected their anger at really, that should be directed at Robert Mueller, at William Barr. And there's a number of reasons why. I could go through example after example after example of this. Maxine Waters and Senator Hanaro of Hawaii are calling for William Barr to resign, as are a number of other representatives, including Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Ted Lieu from California and Adam Schiff are both claiming that Mueller lied. Now, nobody has yet, and Nancy Pelosi actually said this too, said that the Attorney General has been lying to Congress. He has committed perjury, but nobody has been able to figure out exactly what he lied about. See, and this is the thing that's so funny about it. They're saying, well, we know that he was lying. Okay, well, what was he lying about? Nobody actually has an answer for that. And the thing is, the reason that this has not come to light is because they're only doing interviews with people in the media that are sympathetic to their cause. And so when they claim that William Barr lied, they just accept it as a fact and don't ask a follow-up question, which some follow-up questions you have to have a little bit of skill, which is somebody on national news shows you should have anyway. But this one's a pretty simple follow-up question. It's just, well, the Attorney General was committing perjury. He lied to us. Okay, what'd he lie about? That's not a hard follow-up question to come up with. I would chance a guess that even though I have a media background, I could find any random person on the street and put them on a news desk in CNN or CBS or ABC or any of the alphabet soup networks, that you could put them in that chair and they could come up with that follow-up question. The reason that the media has not done that is because the media is also mad at William Barr, not because of anything William Barr did, but because they don't like the results of the Mueller report. They were expecting the Mueller report to come out and say, yes, Trump is a criminal, he colluded with Russia, and he tried to obstruct justice to cover it up. Get him. That's what they were expecting. They got the exact opposite, and because they're angry that they did not get the results that they wanted, they're attacking the messenger. I mean, it would be like, let's say you're a big baseball fan, and let's say that you're an Atlanta Braves fan, since we are the official home of the Atlanta Braves here at News Radio 1440. Let's say that you're a big Braves fan, and a random person comes up and says to you, oh, by the way, the Braves lost the other night. You punch that guy in the face for the Braves losing. He's not the reason the Braves lost. He was just telling you that it happened. But that's essentially what's going on here, is that the Democrats are all very, very angry at Attorney General Barr for telling people what Robert Mueller came up with, which was nothing. And because they don't like the news, they're trying to kill the messenger. That's what's going on here. What's hilarious about this, too, is that tons of... By the way, Doug Jones even got in on this. He was saying yesterday that Attorney General Barr, he was disappointed in him, and he saw that Attorney General Barr was essentially acting like the president's personal lawyer. And my immediate reaction to that was Doug Jones completely wasted during that hearing yesterday? Because I watched pretty much all of it, and I didn't see any of that from Attorney General Barr. I was very concerned, and you may remember that I made this point ad nauseum, that what was going to happen once Jeff Sessions was out, that that President Donald Trump was going to appoint somebody that was a wingman. Somebody like Eric Holder that was going to have the president's back, act on his behalf, and do his bidding instead of having his first loyalty to the Constitution like Jeff Sessions. This was something I was very concerned about and voiced that concern on the air over and over again. I still don't think that he should have gotten rid of Jeff Sessions, and I think Jeff Sessions would have done fine in this situation. However, I saw nothing in that conference, the whole thing, that ever even remotely suggested to me that William Barr was acting on behalf of keeping the president's butt out of a crack when there really was something to hide. And this is what's so hilarious about it. They're all claiming that he misled the public. They're all claiming that in some nefarious way, William Barr is hiding the ball from them, and he's keeping them from finding out the real truth about the Mueller report, despite the fact that he released the report, a 400-plus page report by Robert Mueller, which, by the way, he was not required to release. All he had to do, according to law and according to his own job, all he had to do was come out and formally say, I've looked over the report of the special counsel. They have recommended no charges. That is the minimum amount required by law that Attorney General Barr had to do. That's it. That's all he had to do. He would not have been required to do anything more than that. Yet, despite him having the opportunity to do that, he didn't. He not only released a 4-page summary, which people are now claiming was confusing, and we'll go into some of the details on that here in a second, but he not only released a 4-page summary explaining what the conclusions were, he also released the report itself about, 20 days later? So not exactly a lot of time to put together a 400-page report and make sure that everything in it doesn't endanger national security or everything, and yet they did it. Actually, I think 20 is being a little generous. I think it was actually closer to 2 weeks. If I'm not mistaken, it was about 14 days. So this whole thing, he put it all out there. The only things that were not included were the parts that would have legally been required for him not to show. In other words, anything that had to do with national security, anything that would have been considered classified information. I'm guessing there was probably not very much of that in there, if any at all. And the other part that was redacted, and remember that more than 90% of this report is not redacted, but the other part that would have been redacted would have been, according to law, something that had to be sealed, because it's like a grand jury case. You cannot just put out unsubstantiated claims and evidence to cases where there was no indictment recommended. And we did get some indictments out of this to people surrounding Trump, like Paul Manafort. We did have that. But as far as the president himself, some of those details are kept under wraps to protect him, just like it would be any other citizen. Because imagine if that had happened. Let's say that you were just in the wrong place at the wrong time and you were suspected of murder. And the grand jury looked at your case and said, yeah, there's no evidence that he was connected to this. Well, imagine the next day in your local newspaper, they had all of the allegations and all of the evidence that was stacked up in there. And whether or not the grand jury saw any reason to look further into that, the court of public opinion decides you killed that guy. You see how that irreparably could damage your reputation? It is not the job of the Justice Department to embarrass people. It is the job for them to recommend whether or not charges should be brought, whether they did something legal or illegal. They're a law enforcement office. That's their job. And that's their only job. And going along with this theme, and the reason that this is important to note and to remember that that is the primary function of the Justice Department, is that the media is trying to make the case that somehow William Barr hid the ball. Even though the ball is plain sight. He didn't just hide the ball, he put the ball on the internet for everyone to see. You can go on Amazon and purchase a copy of this report. Or if you're like me and don't want to spend money on things you can get for free, you can go to a dark secret website where you can actually read the full report and see all of it. The whole 400-page thing that has been given to Congress. Now, granted, it's really hard to get to this place. It's almost impossible to find. It's on the Justice Department's website. I mean, you couldn't make it more public if you wanted to. They're claiming that somehow William Barr has buried this whole thing and he's hidden the body in a shallow grave, when he's like, nope, here's the body. And anybody that wants to see it, come on, take pictures, take a look at it. I mean, they're acting as though there is no transparency here, even though I can't think of a way that they could be more transparent if they wanted to. And there is a stark contrast with the way that this has been handled and the way that we saw things happen in the Obama administration, where you've got planes dropping off millions of dollars in euros to Iran in the middle of the night with a hostage exchange going on, or you've got the president evoking executive privilege, which, by the way, the president could have done here and didn't when it came to the investigation into Fast and Furious and all the documents there. Something that would have been a crime for the president and the attorney general, all of a sudden, oh, executive privilege. What about the IRS scandal? How all of the computers just happened to break down at exactly the time they were going to go and investigate them. Man, that was convenient for the IRS. So, it's so funny to me that the media constantly accuses President Trump of not being transparent and having this war on the media, which some of his comments are dumb and I don't agree with them, and I wish that he would tone it down a lot of the time. But they're saying that this is true of the president, even though they're showing you the entire report, putting it out there in the public for everyone to see. And you compare that with Obama's treatment of, for example, Fast and Furious, where, nope, we got to seal it all up. Nobody can see it. And the media just acts completely uninterested. Never said that Obama was declaring war on the media, never came out talking about how completely bottled up and untransparent he was being. And yet with the Trump administration, they're showing everybody all of the stuff, and they're still claiming that somehow he's hiding the ball. Now, let's look into this. The headline the other day from USA Today was Robert Mueller objected to AG William Barr's initial summary clearing the president of obstruction. CNN the other day, Mueller expressed misgivings to Barr about 4-page letter. The Huffington Post, Robert Mueller told William Barr he mischaracterized his findings, according to the report. The Washington Post, Mueller complained that Barr's letter did not capture the context of the Trump probe. Okay, well, if you're reading those headlines, then you would say, I guess William Barr is hiding the ball. I guess there is something nefarious, something lurking under the surface that we need to know about. Because Mueller, the guy who actually made the report, is suggesting that Bill Barr did not do what he was supposed to do, that he's misrepresenting it in the 4-page letter, which there's a couple reasons why this is stupid. First of all, even if that were the case, and I don't believe that it was, and we'll go through why in a second, but even if that were the case, this is like complaining about the trailer after the movie comes out. It would be like doing a critical review of the trailer when the movie is already out in the public. And in this case, it's almost like doing that after the movie's already on Blu-ray and everybody's already seen it. Why are you still focused on the 4-page letter, which was always designed to just be a precursor and a heads up, hey, this thing is coming out, here's the basic summary of what it said? That's what they're complaining about. They're complaining about the letter saying this is what's going to be in the report, and then the report coming out later. And here's the reason that it's so incredibly deceptive and dishonest. Because they don't like Trump and because they don't like what the report said, they would have been mad no matter what happened. If William Barr, for example, had said, I'm not going to issue a letter, I just want everybody to read the report itself, and I don't want to give a summary that could be misleading. They'd say, see, he's trying to keep us from knowing what's in the report. He doesn't want to tell us what's in the report. He's just going to put out this big 400-page thing that nobody reads, and then he's going to hope that it confuses everybody. That's the argument they would have made. Because you have to remember, the facts don't matter here. The evidence doesn't matter here. The only thing that matters is the conclusion that they already determined before they got any of the facts, any of the report, that Trump did collude with Russia and he did obstruct justice, and we have to get him out. That's the fundamental idea, the fundamental thing that is determining their behavior. And because of that, anything that runs counter to that must be wrong, it must be a lie, they must be covering up in some way, because they've already decided what the outcome was before they looked at the report. And so this is why they are now trying to complain about that 4-page summary, even though the report is already out in the public for everybody to see. And by the way, if you think that I'm misrepresenting this, those same headlines that I just read about the media that are suggesting that William Barr did something inappropriate, that he was trying to hide the ball, or that he was misrepresenting the report summary, which again doesn't make sense because the report's out there at this point. But nonetheless, let's read those same articles, not different articles talking about those articles. These are in the same stories with the headlines that you just heard. CNN, quote, later Barr and Mueller spoke on the phone. While Mueller didn't think that Barr's letter was inaccurate, the special counsel believed his report was more nuanced on the obstruction of justice issue. According to the Justice Department officials, Mueller was frustrated by media coverage and wanted more of the report to come out, those officials told CNN. The Washington Post. When Barr pressed him whether he thought Barr's letter was inaccurate, Mueller said he did not, but felt the media coverage of the letter was misrepresenting the investigation, officials said. So in both cases, both articles, CNN and the Washington Post, with these misleading headlines that they put out there, do you know what actually was said by Mueller about this whole thing? That he wasn't mad at Barr. He said that Barr's letter was accurate. He said that the media screwed up in their coverage of it. I want you to think about how insane this is and how dumb this is. The media, according to Mueller, not me, screws up the coverage of what the letter said. Mueller gets mad at the media for misrepresenting his report and misrepresenting what the letter, which is a summary of that report, said. And the media somehow blames William Barr for all of this. They're the ones that screwed up. They're the ones that Mueller is upset at. And yet they try to cast it in such a way that what Mueller was really mad at was the summary letter. Basically, they didn't do their jobs, and Mueller was mad at them for not doing their jobs. And their response to this was to blame someone else for why they didn't do their job. That's a pretty solid summary of what just happened here. And that's where we are. The media is trying to cover their own butts. And granted, a lot of it has to do with the fact that they don't like Trump and they wanted the Mueller report to say something else. But it also has to do with them covering up their own butts. I mean, I think in the Washington Post case, this was paragraph 14. They're definitely bearing the lead here. And this is one of the reasons why, even though I think that Trump uses the phrase fake news way too much and is a catch-all for everything, because in my mind, fake news is something that is specifically done in such a way that they made up facts. In this one, they didn't make up facts, and they didn't even really omit the facts. They just hid the facts, knowing that most people were only going to read the headline and then use that as the takeaway. And so it's not technically fake news, but it's intentionally misleading news, which I don't know that it's much better. They know that the average person is not going to dig that far deep into their articles, and because of that, all they have to do is post the misleading headline, which isn't technically incorrect as long as you read the whole story, and then they can claim, well, that the president's just completely off base calling us fake news. Why would he do that? I'm sorry, but that's a lot like fake news. Not a lot of breathing room, not a lot of daylight between you and fake news when you post stories that are intentionally designed specifically to mislead people on what the facts are. And I guess maybe Democrats just read the misleading headlines, and that's where they're getting this idea that William Barr lied about all this, because there's no indication of that whatsoever. And one thing that I would want to bring up, because this is another common argument that I've heard from the left a lot over the past 48 hours, they're saying that the only reason that this happened, and I think that there's at least a shred of truth to that, to this that I'm about to say, the only reason that that Robert Mueller did this and put this in such a way, because it does sound like Mueller is actually a little upset that there weren't more of the damaging things that make the president look bad, and they do make the president look bad. I said that when the report came out, that some of the things that shed light on the president's behavior in the White House would suggest that he's got quite a temper and a terror to work for, and that isn't really that surprising. And it's also not surprising that Robert Mueller and Trump don't like each other. Because when this whole thing started, and again, it helps to have the hindsight of Trump being innocent when it comes to Russian collusion, because that helps explain a lot of his behavior over the course of this. Because if you're an innocent man, you react differently than if you're a guilty man that's trying to do a cover-up. So Trump, being an innocent person, sees Robert Mueller as the special counsel that is supposed to be the person that is going to decide whether he's guilty or innocent, even though Trump knows he didn't do it. And so, because of that, Trump reacts to him as though he's the enemy. And because he thinks that Robert Mueller is the enemy, he does what he always does with people he sees as the enemy, which is he takes jabs at him on social media. Is it childish? Sure. Is it dumb and petty? Yeah, I would go along with that. But if you understand the fact that Trump was innocent, you at least kind of see where he's coming from on that. And because of that, and because of the way that Trump handled it, Robert Mueller turned out to not like Trump because Trump was constantly bashing him on the internet. And so you understand how these two men came to not really like each other. But at the end of the day, Robert Mueller is still an honest man. And he didn't see anything there that rose to the level of prosecution. And so I think that there is at least a shred of truth that the reason that Robert Mueller included some of these details that cast Trump as being a bad boss, I guess is the only way to really describe it, which really shouldn't surprise anybody. I mean, he had a whole reality show dedicated to the fact that he was a pain in the butt to deal with as a boss. But nonetheless, when these details come out, Robert Mueller wanted to do this to hurt Trump, at least politically, even though he couldn't do anything to him legally. And Trump didn't like the fact that Mueller was doing that, but they still didn't hide the ball. They still put it out for everybody to see. And so because of that, Mueller wanted to kind of take a snipe at Trump through including these details in the report. And maybe there's even some truth to this idea that what Mueller was hoping is that even though there's nothing legally that could be done, that the Democrats would look at this as sort of a basis for impeachment proceedings. Maybe that's true. I don't know. But the point is, the argument that they are trying to make now is that the only reason that he did not recommend charges is because of a Department of Justice law, or actually I think it's more of a policy, but nonetheless, that you cannot indict a sitting president. I've heard this so many times from so many talking heads on the left, that the only reason that Robert Mueller did this is because of a decision that was reached that you can't indict a sitting president. The problem with that is, and William Barr brought this up in his testimony yesterday, 3 separate times Robert Mueller was asked about this and asked if that influenced his decision, and he said no. Say what you want about Robert Mueller. The guy doesn't much like the president, and I get that there's some people that just worship at the feet of Trump, and because of that, they don't like Robert Mueller. But he's an honest guy. He's an honest man. And he was saying, in this case, and this is actually a part of his official statement, in this case, even if that was essentially not a factor in my decision, even if that decision had never been reached, even if I could indict a sitting president, from a legal perspective, there is still not enough evidence to raise the obstruction of justice charge to a level of criminality. It was a non-factor. And anybody that is paying attention to the evidence readily understands this. He said it 3 different times. And this is not a guy that likes Trump, but again, is a guy who is an honest man. And because he is an honest man, he said, you know what, even if that had been the case, even if I still didn't even consider that when it came to whether or not I was going to recommend charges. So essentially, what's going on here is that Bob Mueller did his job and did his job the way that he was supposed to. And in response to that, William Barr, the Attorney General, did his job and did it the way he was supposed to. And now the Democrats are calling for him to resign or threaten to impeach the Attorney General. So let's recap and put this all together in a neat little bow. What's going on now is that the Democrats are saying because the messenger, the Attorney General, gave us the report, and we didn't like what the report said, we think he should resign. And the other justification that they're using is because there were at least some parts of the report that were redacted, which I already explained. By law, he was required to redact. They did the maximum amount of transparency. They gave the Democrats the maximum amount of information. If there was anything in here that was redacted that shouldn't have been, you know who would say something about it? Robert Mueller. Because he still doesn't like Trump. And he still presumably would like to prosecute him, but he couldn't. And because of that, this guy is not a shrinking violet. He's not somebody that tends to keep his mouth shut on matters like this. All Robert Mueller would have to do is say, William Barr's lying about this. He redacted stuff that he didn't have to. He's trying to protect the president. But Robert Mueller isn't saying that because it's not true. And so what this all really boils down to is that they're mad at Robert Mueller, and they're taking it out on William Barr, saying that he should either be impeached or resign. And they're saying this because the Attorney General refused to break the law. He is a law enforcement officer. And they're essentially saying now that because the top law enforcement officer in the United States refuses to break the law to satisfy us, we think that he should resign. They're mad at him for doing his job and doing it correctly. But if you're operating from the standpoint of Orange Man bad and anything that makes him look not like a criminal should be done away with and must be despised, that's the only way any of this makes sense. They're mad that they didn't get the results that they wanted, and because of that, they're taking it out on William Barr. And it's not William Barr's fault. They would have taken it out on anybody that was telling them things about Donald Trump that they didn't like. So that being said, let's go ahead and go to the Daily Dose of Stupid.
That was stupid.
I know it was stupid.
Really stupid.
Hey, I just said it was stupid.
Today's Daily Dose of Stupid is a case of Democrats because they've claimed that William Barr is lying. We're going to take a look at Democrats lying about Donald Trump. You may recall that instead of the White House Correspondents' Dinner, President Trump hosted a rally in Wisconsin. And since we were talking about abortion earlier today within our own state of Alabama, I thought it was appropriate to bring this up because they have really, it kind of subsided when the whole William Barr thing sprung up. But this was something that they had been talking about really all week and saying that President Trump actually lied himself and horribly misrepresented something. But the Democrats are lying about Trump lying, and I'm about to prove this in a second. So this is the clip that drew their ire from President Trump, and this is the part of the speech that they took issue with.
They're aggressively pushing extreme late-term abortion, allowing children to be ripped from their mother's womb right up until the moment of birth. But your Democrat governor here in Wisconsin shockingly stated that he will veto legislation that protects Wisconsin babies born alive. Born alive. The baby is born. The mother meets with the doctor. They take care of the baby. They wrap the baby beautifully. And then the doctor and the mother determine whether or not they will execute the baby. I don't think so. Incredible. No, it's incredible. Until this crazy man in Virginia said it, nobody even thought of that, right? Did anyone even think of that? You hear late term. But this is where the baby is actually born. It came out. It's there. It's wrapped. And that's it. Who believes it?
Okay, so what they're saying here is that President Trump is badly misrepresenting their actual position. And you'll remember that what Trump was saying in that clip is that they have the baby, they wrap the baby up, they put the baby in another room, and then they talk with the mother about whether or not they're going to execute it. Now, what they're saying is that, no, Trump, this isn't what we're talking about. That's not our position. We're not saying that you should be able to execute the baby. We're just saying that you should be allowed to starve it to death or to deny it medical care so that it dies. Oh, well, that's better. I mean, I guess technically it's good that you're not taking a butcher knife to it, but the result is still the child dying, so I don't see much difference. And by the way, when it comes to children that are already being born, we're not talking about kids in the womb at this point. We're talking about babies that are outside the womb. Again, I don't see the difference. I think of them as being equally valuable. But the Democrat position is that they're not equally valuable. So how do they sync that up? If they're saying that, well, once the baby is alive, once the baby is born, then it's a human and it has to be protected. Well, then how are they justifying this case that, oh, well, you're misrepresenting us. We're not saying that you can go in and kill the baby. We're saying that you can let it sit there on the table and let it die. Well, that makes me feel a lot better. What if we apply, again, going back to earlier in the episode, what if we applied this same logic to a 5-year-old? Look, it's wrong to kill your 5-year-old son. But if it's been a really bad day and you're having a really hard time with it and you just think that it would be better if you didn't have a kid anymore, if you want to just starve him to death or if he's like really sick and you don't give him medical treatment, that's fine. What universe are you people living in that you think that this is okay? But here's the thing. Even that argument falls apart because Lord knows Trump has a hard time with getting details correct. He does. This is something that has been true since before he was even president. When he tells a story, he tends to either embellish or mix up some of the details and not get it exactly right, or, mix up a key point to where he misstates something. That happens a lot. The president is not a world-class communicator. He's just not. He's not Ronald Reagan. He's not Ted Cruz. He doesn't have that innate ability, not even Barack Obama. I would even say that Barack Obama is a lot better when it comes to being precise on the details, that kind of thing. So it would not surprise me if President Trump in a speech, especially one of his rally speeches, screwed up the details and messed up the story. That didn't happen here. That didn't happen even though that's exactly what Bernie Sanders was suggesting happened. If you look at his tweet in response to this is completely false. And what a pathological liar and misogynist sounds like when he talks about abortion. Together, we must respect a woman's right to control her own body. So that was Bernie Sanders' point. He's saying that he's completely misrepresenting the Democrat position here. But here's the funny thing about that. Bernie, you voted for this. Bernie Sanders. He voted against the Born Alive protection bill that went through the Senate. Did he forget about that? Did he suddenly wait? I mean, the guy's 170 years old. I guess it's possible that it just slipped right out of his mind that he actually did vote for this. The guy's, he's pretty senile at this point. But did Bernie Sanders really forget that he voted against protections that would prevent exactly what President Trump is talking about? That wouldn't be possible if you had voted in favor of that bill and it had passed, but Bernie Sanders voted against that protection. Did he just forget that that happened? Furthermore, Trump didn't misrepresent the truth here, nor did he embellish, nor did he get the details wrong. A lot of times he does. This is not one of those times. And to prove my point, he actually specifically cited in the clip that you just watched, you saw it yourself, he cited that it was the governor of Virginia, Northam, that came up with this thing. And he said that that was his position. You listen to Ralph Northam in this interview and tell me if Trump in any way misrepresented that position.
If a mother is in labor, I can tell you exactly what would happen. The infant would be delivered. The infant would be kept comfortable. The infant would be resuscitated if that's what the mother and the family desired. And then a discussion would ensue between the physicians and the mother.
What was inaccurate about that? That is pretty much verbatim what Trump just said. All he did was restate Governor Northam's position on this issue. He said that, you heard him in his own words, What would happen is the mother and the child would be resuscitated. They would wrap the baby up and be kept comfortable. And then a discussion would ensue about whether or not they're going to keep the child. In other words, whether or not they're going to kill the baby or not kill the baby. That's infanticide. That's Northam's position. And that's exactly the way, I mean, almost word for word, what Trump said at the rally. He used a little bit harsher language, but the details were exactly the same. And so the Democrats, again, trying to completely misrepresent what is being said here. They're saying that Trump is lying. It turns out they're actually the ones that are misrepresenting the position here. I mean, Trump did it a little more harshly than them, but they voted against it. So really, how is that a misrepresentation of your values? And he even specifically cited the man that gave this position that he was drawing that from in his speech. How is that a misrepresentation? I don't understand it. The issue that they had may have been in messaging, that because of the way that Trump said it, that it sounded more cruel than the very sterilized version that you heard from Ralph from Northam there. But the result is exactly the same, so what's the difference? I mean, that's just at that point, you're just arguing about the delivery, not the message itself. And the way that the Democrats refuse to stand up for the life of the unborn, or in this case, the people that are already born, is incredibly grotesque. Let's go ahead and go to the chaplain's report.
In 1775, the Continental Congress created the Chaplain Corps. Under the command of General George Washington, each soldier was required to attend worship service every Sunday. While other armies advanced on their feet, Washington's troops advanced on their knees. It's time for the Chaplain's Report with Caleb Colquitt on tactics.
Chaplain's Report today, we're going to finish up by continuing our series through the book of Daniel. And just to give you a little bit of background in case you didn't happen to see our last Chaplain's Report, King Belshazzar is having a great feast. And in this feast, he commands for the vessels that were in the temple of God that were taken from Jerusalem by his father Nebuchadnezzar when he conquered Jerusalem. He commands those to be brought out so that he and his friends at the dinner feast there can drink and enjoy themselves. And at this point, while they're doing this, they start praising other gods. They start talking about their own pagan gods, and they start praising, the Bible says, the gods of gold and iron and wood and all these other material things. Well, it is at this point that they suddenly see handwriting on the wall. That a hand, not attached to somebody's body, just a hand. I kind of picture it kind of like being Thing from the Addams Family, but probably a lot more mystical than that. But anyway, just this disembodied hand starts writing a message on the wall, and they can't figure out what the thing says. They can't figure out how to read it or what it means. And because of this, the king goes to all his magicians and conjurers, and none of them can figure it out. So what he at this point does is seeks the counsel of the queen. And the queen tells him about Daniel, and how Daniel has been able to interpret dreams and help out his father when he was king. At this point, King Belshazzar offers lots of lavish gifts to the man that can translate it, and specifically tells Daniel, when Daniel comes before him, that if you do this, then I'm going to just heap these gifts on you, and you're going to be taken care of. And I love Daniel's response to this that we can see in Daniel chapter 5, verses 17 through 20. Then Daniel answered and said before the king, "Keep your gifts for yourself, or give your rewards to someone else. However, I will read the inscription to the king and make the interpretation known to him. O king, the Most High God granted sovereignty, grandeur, glory, majesty to Nebuchadnezzar your father." In verse 19, Because of the grandeur which he bestowed on him, all the peoples, nations, and men of every language feared and trembled before him. Whomever he wished he killed, and whomever he wished he spared alive, and whomever he wished he elevated, and whomever he wished he humbled. But when his heart was lifted up, and his spirit became so proud that he behaved arrogantly, he was disposed from his royal throne, and his glory was taken away from him. Now, one of the things that's going on here, and remember that Nebuchadnezzar presumably has been brought back to himself at this point. We're not real sure about the chronology. It's possible that this is in that time where Nebuchadnezzar has been disposed and that he's out living with the beast of the field. But I love the way that Daniel starts out this whole speech. He says, keep your gifts, or give them to somebody else. But I'm still going to do the job that you ask me to. So in other words, kind of what Daniel is saying here, I don't need your riches, I don't need your rewards. But because you're the king and you ask me to do this, then I'll happily make the translation for you. You see, Daniel was living in an environment that was not like this. And we've seen that from earlier in the book. The Chaldeans and the magicians, they're all constantly at each other's throats. They're vying for superiority. They're vying for wealth and power. And they're trying to one-up each other constantly. And Daniel is just sitting there saying, this is my job. I'm going to do my job regardless of whether I get these lavish gifts or anything special out of it. Why does Daniel take that stance? Well, I think part of it has, because Daniel was not a necessarily materialistic person, and because he set his mind on spiritual things. I think that's a big contributing factor, and that ought not be discounted. But I think there's another thing at play here. You'll notice in just a few verses, what Daniel actually talks about is how Nebuchadnezzar was elevated by God, and he had all this power and all this wealth, and he was able to kill whoever he wanted to, or exalt whoever he wanted to. Nebuchadnezzar had virtually no restrictions on himself when it came to power and money and all of these amazing things that God blessed him with. And Daniel's looking at that and saying, that didn't keep him from that didn't make him right with God. That didn't keep him from suffering his terrible fate. And so because of that, I think it acts as a cautionary tale to Daniel, to the point to where he's saying, I don't really need the riches. I don't need the title or the prestige or the ability, the power to do what I want to. I'm just going to do my job. There is such a level of humility and honor in Daniel's character. And the reason that the king, Belshazzar, offered this in the first place is because in his experience, and I'm sure that this was true, that's not how the people that worked under him operated. They were constantly vying for his favor. They were constantly trying to become more wealthy, more powerful, more influential. And because of that, he understands that this is going to be what motivates people to do a good job and motivate people to do their best to serve him. This Daniel person's completely different, though. All he's doing is saying, I don't need any of that. You ask me to do it. I'm your subject. You're my king. I'm going to do my job. Simple as that. And so, because of that, I think that there is a level of humility here that guides Daniel and helps him see past all the material blessings and the influence and power that he could have potentially had here. Did Daniel have the ability to interpret? Yeah. Why? Because it came from God. Now, there's nothing wrong with profiting off of your God-given gifts. Every person that has ever made a profit that I'm aware of and uses that to keep them alive are doing so because of the graces of God. But there is something to be said that Daniel doesn't really care about obtaining all this material wealth. At this point, he's already a pretty influential person and a pretty wealthy person. He doesn't really need any more, and he understands that. And so because he has this level of humility and because he has sort of this cautionary tale of what happened to King Nebuchadnezzar, I think that Daniel really has a lot more foresight than the people surrounding him at this point. Because Belshazzar doesn't. in Belshazzar's mind, this is what really motivates people. And what's important here is that before Daniel delivers the message that God wants the king to have, which I believe actually is another reason why Daniel is eager to interpret this message regardless of what he gets out of it, is because he has the good sense to know God wrote this message on the wall for a reason. He wants the king to know what it says, and he put me in this place to translate it. I don't need to be paid or greatly rewarded for doing what God wants me to do. And so because of that, Daniel's perspective is, I'm going to do this regardless. See, what should have happened here is that Belshazzar should have taken the same cue that David did. He should have seen what happened to his father and seen how his pride and arrogance lifted him up and caused him to be driven away from mankind and live like a beast. He should have seen that and thought, maybe I should try to avoid that. See, that's another thing too. Sometimes the folly of another person can act as a powerful cautionary tale for us. Sometimes when we see somebody engage in a sin and fall prey to that sin, it should be a strong warning to everybody else, because of course God is just and he allows for people to make their own decisions. And sometimes he allows them to fall prey to the worldly consequences of those decisions. And that does spring from his own sense of justice. But it also springs from his love. That he wants other people surrounding that person to see, wow, that behavior did not work out well for that person. Maybe I should avoid doing that. And so Nebuchadnezzar's punishment not only eventually, as we just read in the last chapter, bring him to where his reason returned to him, as the Bible states, and that he learned a valuable lesson. God was also trying to teach other people. He was trying to teach them a lesson by showing in Nebuchadnezzar's life what being separated from God and relying on your own self and your own abilities really looks like. It devolves you into an animal. And that's essentially what we are without God. And that was a lesson he was trying to teach those around him. It's pretty clear based on this verse, Daniel got the message. Daniel understood. Daniel got, that is not something that I want to follow in the footsteps of. That is not something I want to happen to me. Belshazzar clearly doesn't get the message. So when it comes to our own pride and relying on God, we really need to be a lot like Daniel when we see the plight of others around us that are caught up in the consequences of their own sin. We need to heed that warning like Daniel. Don't be like Belshazzar, who despite the evidence surrounding you, still doesn't see the value in obeying the one true God. Stay the course, friends.
Tactics is a production of News Radio 1440 and Cumulus Media Montgomery. Any opinions expressed on this program are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Cumulus Media. The theme song for Tactics is 6 Foot Town by Big and Rich. Graphics by Jessica Dawson. Broadcast studios provided by Cumulus Media Montgomery. Location studios provided by the Dalraida Church of Christ. Copyright 2019.